So Rurik, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own backgrounds? Where did you grow up?
Awesome, so thank you for that. I'm originally from the Eastern Cape. I was born in a little town, I think it's now called Makanda, used to be known as Grahamstown. Born there, lived there for the first 3 years of my life, then moved to Port Elizabeth by virtue of my dad's work. My dad was a career policeman and lived in PE from 1972 all the way through to when I graduated 1990, beginning of 1991, and then moved to Cape Town, where most people that look like me end up in Cape Town. Most people still think I'm from Cape Town. It's only when I speak Afrikaans where they can say, well, this guy is actually not from Cape Town, because I don't speak the Afrikaans Cape Town dialect. Right. Lived in Cape Town from 91 until 2009, 2010, and then moved to Joburg. I've been a businessman in Cape Town. My first career in Cape Town was teaching. I trained in humanities. In my first degree, I pretty much did everything from maths to computer science to biblical studies, but my majors were pedagogics or education, psychology, and my favorite subject back then was geography. Moved to Cape Town and then ended up as a teacher at 2 high schools and 2 primary schools. Did that for just over 5 years, and then retired into business. Was involved in the business since October 91, and then by virtue of serendipity, my dad was transferred to Kimberley, got a very senior post as one of the provincial commissioners of the Northern Cape. And we started a family business October 1990. When they left in 95, myself and my sister kind of took the business over. And looking back, we did the classic, what the business gurus now write about as 10x. We did the 10x. In fact, in terms of our tenure in the business, we did a 60x over 23 years.
60?
60.
Really?
60 times growth from a tiny little 400,000 Rand per annum business to a 20 million Rand per annum business, which was a lot of fun. It was my PhD in business.
What was the business all about?
So it was a variety of stuff that I was involved in, but the engine room was a marketing and distribution business for a company called, back then it was called Narden International, which then became Quest International. Then we also got involved with a company called National Starch and Chemical. And we distributed food flavorants, enzyme systems, emulsifiers, and also modified food starches. And did that for the better part of almost 25 years. I immediately after exiting teaching and entering business, I started studying law. I was always, with a capital A, fascinated by the law. Maybe Nelson Mandela's influence, also maybe the influence of TV. And immediately started studying law, completed my law degree while trying to be a businessman, and with the help of a then uncle, my mom's brother-in-law, got involved in law on a part-time basis to kind of feel it out, loved it, did my articles while I was a businessman. We got involved in other businesses other than the marketing and distribution business, which we started in October 91. Right. In 95, when my parents migrated to Kimberley, we got involved with a franchise network known as Mr. Video. Back then, videos was the thing, right. And we were involved in a couple of revolutions in that industry, going from VHS to DVD, and then right. Going to the pirating issue where videos could then be put onto hard drives. So observing how the influence of pivots in an industry can impact a business. So did the Mr. Video thing as a parallel to the marketing and distribution business, more as a back then job for my mom in Kimberley. Right. So I got some great retail experience, which I loved. Along with the business-to-business model of the marketing and distribution business. Also got involved in some property development, which I enjoyed, and learned some very hard lessons, lost a lot of money in property, and also learning that you have to make more than what you lose, and always make sure that you keep that balance. And also a lesson is when you're going to property, make sure that you have very, very deep pockets to ride out the waves, or have people that can support you that have very, very deep pockets. So that is maybe a little bit about myself. Moved to Johannesburg 2009 because I believe that as a commercial animal, as a lawyer, I am a gladiator, a participant in the robust world of the capitalistic free market economy. And to do that as a gladiator, metaphorically speaking, Johannesburg is Africa's Rome. And this was the first city that I proactively chose to move to. And back then, my girlfriend, now my wife, and the mother of two beautiful children of ours, supported me. A Munich-born, German-born Austrian woman by the name of Vera Maria Hartinger, now Rurik McKaiser, or as her mom calls her Vera. And we've been living in Joburg since 2009.
Now, Rurik, when you grew up, what was your dream career?
You know, that is a great question. I've had a couple, right? I've dreamt of being an inventor, being a scientist. I've had dreams of being a pilot, a fighter pilot, commercial pilot. I've also had dreams of being a lawyer. Those were the things that came up for me, and never really had in my dream space being a businessman per se. And I think it had to do with my cultural background, where generally people that look like me, you get trained to be a career person. So never really thought of business. And when I got the opportunity in 1991 in the family business, I realized that I actually enjoy business. And what is nice about business is if your idea works and you give your clients what they want, and you go beyond the issue of pricing and into the issue of value adding and the perception of value adding, then the sky is the limit. And that in turn, with my love for the law, put me in a space of what law do I want to practice. And as a businessman, I've now created my legal career practicing for my own account for the past 11 years to be that lawyer, that commercial practitioner that I dreamt of having when I was a businessman. So that's kind of how I've structured my legal practice.
And Rurik, who inspired you in your early days?
Sure. Undoubtedly right now, my mom and dad. And when I say that, I feel very emotional. And what is special about my mom and dad is how, with the greatest of odds against them, looking at how my mom and dad grew up and having pulled on the short end of the apartheid stick, I was just fundamentally blessed with, I think, the genetic good luck and the spiritual lucky side of the lotto draw by having these super smart, very ambitious parents, and they've literally given us everything. And with me being the elder sibling, and with me being born back then to my mom that was 19 years old and my dad a young 22-year-old, I had the privilege of witnessing these two amazing people graduate to the highest level of civil society. My mom is a businesswoman and as an entrepreneur, and my dad eventually becoming a securocrat, working very closely with Mandela and Mbeki, and just the privilege of witnessing that and having that as a norm, being able to see, wow, well, actually, this is the normal life of Rurik McKaiser, where you live what it means to be upwardly mobile, and the enjoyment and the learning around that. And then, of course, my two sisters. I'm blessed with two magical sisters. My sisters, in their own right, are phenomenal performers and achievers. And of late, the last 11 years, my beautiful wife. And then there's other people around me. I think looking at Nelson Mandela, what he's done was just absolutely amazing. A phenomenal inspiration, how a man that was a lawyer like me was willing to give up everything for his dream and his vision, which is to have something that he probably knew would not be able to be achieved in his lifetime, but was willing to lay down his life for that, which is to have a non-racial South Africa where everyone can prosper in this amazing, very rich, very beautiful, very bountiful country of ours. So I would say Mandela had an impact on me choosing the law, and I think it's either Mandela or Gandhi, both happen to be lawyers, that says most people think of the law as something that incarcerates, but very few of us think of the law as something that emancipates. And if you look at the preamble of our Constitution, which is one of the crown jewels of our country and one of our great exports to the world, it's directly because of men like Nelson Mandela and people that were inspired, both men and women like Nelson Mandela, and people that were inspired by the vision of Mandela. So I would say definitely my mom and dad, my two sisters, my dear wife, Mandela, and the list can go on. I think Barack Obama is another beautiful inspiration for me, where he had the audacity of hope and to be in that space of living what it means to say, yes, we can, which is for me very powerful and undoubtedly one of the most brilliant, intellectually gifted people that chose politics as a career, had the intellectual muscle to drive that, and had an impact on the world in a very real way. I think of late, I've gotten a lot of new respect for Bill Gates, what men like Bill Gates is doing in giving their money away and literally taking their fortune and doing something fundamentally tangible for people like you and I. And that for me is profoundly inspirational. I'll pause there. Yeah.
Now, Rurik, looking back over your career,
yes,
would you say there was a major turning point where things could have gone different, but you decided to take your career this way?
Yes. That is a great question. You definitely don't ask easy questions. So the thing that comes up for me on that one is if I look back, turning point in my career, I would say, was the very rude awakening that I got at a couple of levels. The one was, I think, commercially, well, maybe the first one I would say was being this township kid. If I take it chronologically, right, some of the clever guys speaks about the phenomenal impact that apparently small chance random events can have on the trajectory and course of our lives. So I would say, Nick, going from Galvindale, the typical so-called township of Port Elizabeth along Stanford Road, going from Galvindale to then what was called UPE, where back then in the mid to late 80s when I was an undergrad student, going to university where 99% plus of the student body was white people looking like you, and then me being exposed to this, coming from a schooling system with a very different curriculum, and then the realization, I would say, that wow, this grand scheme of apartheid was actually a very big con, because nobody here is necessarily smarter than me. The fundamental difference is the access to opportunities and the difference that can make on the life path of individuals, and the people that were the benefactors of that was white South Africans at the expense of black South Africans. So that was a big wake-up call for me. It influenced me in a very clear way about wanting to make the world different. When I got into my teaching career, very short career, 5.5 years, I was very active in breaking down the apartheid system, very clear around protesting, was involved in a trade union called SATU, South African Democratic Teachers Union. I was part of the last group of 44 teachers that got arrested for protesting. And that influenced my outlook around, let's call it agency, which is, wow, actually, as an educated black individual, I have agency to make a difference in the system. And if I can support more people like me to help create a tipping point, things can change, as opposed to waiting for what are they going to do. Kind of like what Steve Jobs said, that one of his realizations was, if he fiddles here, he can make a little dent in the universe. They're like the systemic thing. Small inputs here can cause wild tunes on the other side. So I would say, as a university graduate, being a teacher on the Cape Flats, as it was then called, of a so-called colored school, realizing that with know-how and turning that know-how into action, being able to change the world. Another big breakthrough for me was being a part-time student and taking ownership of wanting to be a different professional, studying law. That was great. I'm a prolific absorber of content. I enjoy reading 2 or 3 books a week, and what that does for me, it allows me to take the wisdom that somebody has spent 5 to 10 years of their life in, and being able to internalize that over a couple of days. So those are the type of stuff that I would say has shifted my path. Another big thing in recent times was getting married to my dear wife Vera, which was something that I think was out of character. I self-identify as a black South African. I don't quite enjoy the term put on me as colored. It feels like me buying into the successful de-Africanization of people that look like me by the previous regime. So I prefer self-identifying as black, because my experience as a so-called colored person is that of a black person wherever I go in the world. So as a black South African getting married to a Munich-born Austrian, and how my wife and I dialogue about, in inverted commas, the impossibility of our relationship. And thanks to some beautiful mentors of mine, in this case a beautiful man by the name of Julian Son, fantastic academic, beautiful intellectual, beautiful father figure and mentor to my wife and I, could help us explore that Vera and I, we were not naive and blinded by our love for each other, but the shift that we made when we chose to get together on 2 April 2009, that shift was founded in optimism and not naivety. So that was beautiful. That is beautiful. Our relationship is intense. She is a super smart woman. I would like to think of myself as smart and informed. And we're constantly growing to give our children a different life, a better life, to the life that was when her and I grew up, she in Europe and South Africa, and me in the townships of South Africa. So that was a big change. Living in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg was the first time that I'm living behind a 2-meter wall with an electric fence. Where I grew up, there were no boundary walls and fences, very safe. So I had to get used to the idea that the people around me experienced the world as unsafe, because I didn't grow up like that. I grew up playing in the streets, and now in Joburg, it's like, well, okay, I must be careful that I don't buy into their notion that South Africa is this unsafe space. Yes, if you're going to be caught on the wrong side of town, you could end up getting harmed. My dear wife had a very unfortunate experience in downtown Joburg, being held at gunpoint and the stuff that goes with that. And that can happen. And it's a wake-up call around, we have to be vigilant. So from an impact on my career path, I would say the last 11 years, and I measure my life in decades. I had the privilege of turning 50 in February this year. First 10 years of my life is learning 2 languages, learning to understand how to read and write. The second 10 years of my life was learning what it might be like to become an adult, and visiting the intellectual world around being educated and debating and arguing, and what could the rest of my life look like. The third decade of my life is expanding my horizons as a global citizen with a passion for Formula One, where I could go and visit these races live, and learning what it is to take ownership of my agency for my decade of 20 to 30. Then going from 30 to 40 is establishing myself as the next generation of taking ownership of what, I forgot the professor's name at UCT that coined the phrase Black Diamond. What is the responsibility that it entails to be a black diamond in South Africa and in the world? My last decade as 40 to 50, establishing myself as a very well-networked global citizen, knowing people on 6 continents in the world, now being the son of a general, because my dad was a police commissioner, him being well-connected, same with my mom, having friends that are now in supremely powerful positions, and with my mom and dad having retired, kind of taking ownership of the space of, wow, we must actually be the big people now, and what that entails around the legacy of the world that we're living in and the world that we're actively creating for our children for the next 100 years, for the next 500 years. So in those bite-sized chunks, the last 10 years of my life, I think, was cementing myself as a commercial legal practitioner and particularly focusing on finding work-life integration, because I don't believe in work-life balance. I think work-life balance is a con that the capitalist system has put onto us. I'm more of a work-life integration, and I've chosen in this lifetime to pursue living a life of being an academic. I used to call myself a closet academic, and my wife said, well, that sounds kind of shadowy. Can you just own that you are an academic? I'm a practitioner. I love being at the cutting edge of presenting solutions to my clients. I enjoy being a husband and a dad, and I love my hobbies, which is reading and staying fit. And over the last 10 years, I'm in that space where of the things that I am doing is going into thought leadership, to the extent where one of our big national publishers, as part of an international group, has invited me to write the books for them, and I'm looking forward to coloring that in and what that may look like for the next 10 years, the next big decade of my life. So
Right.
yeah.
So Rurik,
Yes.
what does the future of leadership mean to you?
That is a wonderful, wonderful question. So I'm an avid reader, and my all-time favorite author is an Austrian-born American by the name of Peter Drucker. Absolutely love his work. I've read all of his books, and I've read a lot of the commentaries on his books. Future of Leaders, he speaks about management challenges for the 21st century. I've had the privilege of doing and studying towards a master's degree in future studies at Stellenbosch University. So I have been doing some future gazing. So Nick, I would say, looking at where we come from over the last 10 years in South Africa, where we dipped into a kleptocracy. And part of how Jacob Zuma and the Guptas and any of the other clans that were involved in this kleptocracy, which was of course coming on for hundreds of years. The difference now is that the kleptocrats looked a lot more like me, and before that the kleptocrats looked a lot more like you. So what will the leader of the future look like? I think it would be founded in making the shift away from the American capitalist model of what Lynn Stout writes about, pertaining to the myth of shareholder capitalism and primacy, which was influenced by the Chicago School of Economics, where there's this notion that the company has as its objective the enrichment of the shareholders. I think that is an inappropriate notion. Companies operate within a certain economic sphere, within a certain technosphere, with a variety of stakeholders. And for the company to be judged to be successful. So I think in terms of what Professor Lynn Stout said, as I mentioned, as informed by the Chicago School of Economics, the notion of American capitalism around shareholder primacy, which I believe is a myth, we should move away from that into stakeholder primacy, right? How do we do that? First and foremost is to look at who are those stakeholders. The stakeholders aren't only the shareholders. There is the leadership / management of the, management of the company. There is the organized labor in the company. There is the body of creditors that gives this company a credit. There is the customers or the clients to this company. There is the community in which this company operates. And all of those, including the environment, makes up this body of stakeholders that needs to be nurtured and looked after. And there needs to be a happy balance. Yes, shareholders are important, but I believe that the way the Americans are doing it with the shareholders being the be-all and end-all, inappropriate in the way that we need to move forward. And I suppose that's part of the reason why there are so few companies in the world that are older than 100 years. If I look at when I became aware of the American Fortune 500 listings in Fortune magazine and the global Fortune 500 listing, if I go back to the mid-90s when I became a commercial animal, and I look at that list, and I look at that list today, very few companies that was in the top 10, top 20 are still there, which speaks about sustainability and longevity. So I believe, Nick, in terms of the future of leadership, we have this beautiful document in South Africa that was put together by Professor Mervyn King and his team with the support of the IOD, the Institute of Directors, called the King Code. And the very first principle of the King Code for me is so beautiful. It says, the governing body should lead ethically and effectively. And that says it all. You know, I can bounce to principle number 4. The governing body should appreciate that the organization's core purpose, its risks and opportunities, strategy, business model, performance and sustainable development are inseparable elements of the value creation process. Now, those are just 2 of my favorite principles of the King Code. That answers it. If we can go into our business schools, our law schools, and teach our leaders of today and tomorrow to get into the space of understanding what ethical leadership is all about, and the shift of going from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy, I think the world, in fact, I don't think so, I'm convinced about it. It feels so clear that it feels like a memory. I'm convinced that the world that we will leave for our children will be fundamentally different to the world that we live in. I can only eat 1 large plate of food per day. I don't have to work for 10 or 100 large plates of food per day. We need to change the thinking of our entrepreneurs and our captains of thinking that when they run a business, it is a privilege afforded to them by society, and the roads that they're riding on, the internet backbone that they're using, the telephony, the train lines, all of that has been built by taxpayers' money, and it's utilized as an investment into the future, and that there's a duty on us when we accumulate wealth, generate riches, for that to be appropriately distributed amongst the shareholders. And that's not me speaking about being a communist or a socialist, but it's speaking about equitability. I think it's inappropriate for the owners, in inverted commas, and bosses of companies to earn 1,000 times more money than the really rubbish salaries that are being paid to people at the bottom echelons of the organizations. There's something inappropriate about people like you and I that make that okay. And what is it that we can do to get all business people to occupy the space of Bill Gates that takes their wealth, and now Warren Buffett, and in South Africa Patrice Motsepe, that's giving away their wealth and turning their wealth into gifts for everyone to get the benefit of. In line with that, I had the privilege of hearing Dr. Verwoerd, the grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd, speak at the Apartheid Museum on Wednesday evening, and he shared something beautiful. And I went to him afterwards and had a dialogue with him, my wife and I, when he said, what is it that I will do when my aging parents, who are now in their 90s, and I'm quoting him or paraphrasing him, what is it that I will do when my parents pass on and I inherit their property and their wealth? Do I take all of that for myself, or do I apply my mind and say, well, actually, white people in South Africa have disenfranchised black people to the tune that we as white people own 87% of the land and black people own 13% of the land. Should I reverse that and say, I've inherited this from my parents, I'm going to now actually take 13% and give 87% back to where it's due? And that was profound. And I checked with him and I said, well, that is a very powerful notion. Where does it come from? And he said, well, it's brand new. He's been thinking about it very recently with his aging parents, and it's the first time at a public forum that he's stated that into the open. Radical notions, but what is radical today can be normal tomorrow. So those are of the things that I'm thinking around ethically just leadership. Peter Drucker speaks about effective executives, and effectiveness and efficiency is not the same thing. Systems and machines are efficient, but we as people have the ability to be very effective in our choice as to whether we choose to be productive, and then choosing how we want to engage as being productive. And part of that can be to embrace the notion of how do we live lives that are equitable. And this is not me professing that there should be some sort of a land grab, but how do we go into that space where we can sleep easy, and be okay with the fact that, you know what, we are aspiring to do what the Canadians are doing, where they're aspiring to have systems and processes in place to catch those of us that have been spat out by the system in a way that would be good for all of us.
Right. Yeah. Now, Rurik, when you speak to future leaders,
yes,
what is it you tell them? How should they go about handling social media to build their own leadership brands?
So the lawyer inside of me is in a space of be careful of social media, be careful of being mobbed by social media. I think of a beautiful talk by John Ronson, who's written an awesome book unrelated to social media. The book is called The Psychopath Test. The same John Ronson, an English journalist, speaks about a specific woman that when she got onto a flight, a long-haul flight, she passed a very flippant comment on social media, and by the time she switched her phone on 10 hours later, her life was over. Yeah. Quite literally, because of her recklessness in how she used social media. So first and foremost, as a legal practitioner, my advice would be for any up-and-coming entrepreneur, be careful of your brand. You are your brand. All of us now have access to billions of people by virtue of social media. Manage how you choose to communicate on social media, and less is more. Make sure that you engage with professionals to support you on building your brand. I forgot the American author's name. That will come back to me. I think it's Peter Meerman Scott, or Scott Meerman. He writes on this new space of PR and social media and marketing that we're in, and he's got some great tools on how to do that. I would say make sure that you get your advice from those that are well informed. Use lessons learned by those that harm themselves as lessons that you don't need to repeat, and choose your niche. Choose your niche. We are trapped in this space, I believe, by needing and wanting to be unicorns, wanting to be startups, and wanting to be billionaires. I think that is overrated. Choose your business. I think it's Mike Medina wrote a beautiful book, two books actually. One is called Brain Rules and one is called Brain Rules for Babies. And when my son Alexander came along, and then with the arrival of Naomi 3 years after Alexander, I reread Medina's books, and his research is very clear. He said what he discovered around people being happy in the American sense is that families just need to earn 10 years ago at the parity of $60,000 per annum. And then beyond that, you don't necessarily become more happy, right? So you have all the happiness you need in terms of what needs to be taken care of for high quality of life. So I would say to those that want to build their brand, choose how it is that you can be of service. Choose your niche. Choose to graduate from being good to being very good to being excellent and to being outstanding. When you choose your niche and you operate in the space of being outstanding, the world is willing to pay you whatever you ask for. If you operate in being excellent, you'll always get good money. If you operate in being good, you'll always get average money. So there's a disproportion in that steps moving upwards from being good to outstanding. Once you break the glass ceiling of going from excellent to outstanding, you will get whatever it is at a material financial level that you ask the world to give you, whether you are Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or our very own Vusi. There's guys like Robin Banks that I think is graduating in South Africa from being excellent to being outstanding and managing that in the best possible way. So choose that. It doesn't have to be 10x. It can be 2x. And as Mike Medina said, you only need as a family, in the American context, that metaphorical $60,000 per annum. So that would be my advice.
Now, Rurik, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
So I've been involved in an organization called the Mankind Project. I've chosen to step backwards out of it, or just maybe I shouldn't say step backwards, but step back, step out of it. I love the philosophy and technology of the organization, and I think my impatience around the moving forward and overcoming sexism and racism has put me in a space of I think they have outgrown me. And I'm open to saying that maybe I could have outgrown them. I don't know. I'm open to it being either way. The technology being wonderful, personal leadership development. In there, I've been blessed with great mentors, and I've had the privilege of having men in particular ask me to mentor them. One gentleman of late, a peer of mine in terms of age, intellect, and I would say professional prowess, a gentleman by the name of Andrew. I won't mention surnames because I'm not sure if I have his permission to speak about him. He's been certified into a level of leadership. He runs a fantastic business, and I'm confident that the softer nuances around having ticklish and uncomfortable or apparently uncomfortable conversations around some of the issues of diversity, around race, gender, class, sexual orientation. I'm confident that my input and mentoring and co-mentoring of Andrew has had a phenomenal impact in the way that he's graduated from a South African businessman into being a global businessman, where he now serves on a global board of the organization that he's part of. With immense pride, I look at men like Andrew. And there are others. I think of my days when I was a teacher. One of my clients now, again, I don't have permission to mention a surname, I'll just call her Inga. She's a woman of color. She is a director of a very dynamic high-tech business, and I had the privilege of sitting with the three executives, of which she was one. And I was her teacher many years ago, and sitting in a boardroom, me as I would like to think of as a thought leader, professional, and her as a very competent, excellent, if not outstanding businesswoman, and us engaging as peers, and her being a client of mine was just a absolutely phenomenal, very beautiful experience. Then there are men in the US that I had the privilege of being mentored by, and men that I have mentored that will from time to time present me with feedback around, wow, some of the conversation, Rurik, that you and I have had has been tough. I've internalized some of your teachings, and it's helped me to be in a different relationship with my wife, in a different relationship with my colleagues at work, and relate to those that are defined as other very differently. As a professional, I oftentimes categorize myself as being unemployable. And part of what I do is people that are in my organization, because I'm a lot better as a systems and process person than a people's person, I would like to think of me being good with people, but I think I'm pretty outstanding when it comes to processes and systems. I spend a significant amount of time investing in those around me and betting on who they are and what they can do in the way that Peter Drucker would. From a place of everyone is entitled to great leadership, great management, which is one of the adages of Peter Drucker. I empower my team so that when they leave my organization, I would want them to be in a space of, wow, I'm not sure that where I'm at now will ever be like an organization that was led by Rurik McKaiser. So it's what is it that I can do in the best possible way to turn my colleagues and employees around me, my team members, into being unemployable, in the best sense of the word. Then maybe as a conclusion to that, Nick, I'm now 50 years old. When it comes to mentoring people, I'm very clear that when I mentor, it has to be a two-way street, whether you're 10 years my junior or 100 years my junior or my senior. What does the relationship look like from a co-mentoring perspective? Are we co-mentoring? In this organization that I've been part of, known as the Mankind Project, I have been exposed to men that want to be seen to be demigods as mentors too, and kind of collect, look, I'm mentoring so many people. It's about co-mentoring. Can you give and receive at the same time? Why am I mentioning that? I am 50 years old. I'm married to a woman that is 12 years younger than me. And I want to caution people that are in co-mentoring mentee spaces with men like myself that it is okay to challenge older guys. As a gray-bearded 50-year-old guy, I think it's completely appropriate for younger mentors, younger mentees, co-mentees, to say, no, Rurik, you're a little bit behind in the times. You don't know much about this, but thanks for your input and for them to pursue their dreams, and for me to be in a humble space of still continuing to support. So to the young guys out there, the young ladies out there, you don't have to listen to us greybeards, and you can be selective as to the wisdom that you glean from us greybeards, and take the good with the bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Rurik, how can our listeners get hold of you, and where should they follow you? I'm happy to give my cell number. I do switch my cell phone off when I sleep. So my cell number is +27 83 261 0197, or in short 083 261 0197. That's my number. My email address is Rurik, Rurik
and then my name and surname, Rurik McKaiser, McKaiser's with an S.com. I'm on LinkedIn. There is only one Rurik McKaiser on LinkedIn. I checked.
Good.
There's also only one Rurik McKaiser on Twitter, and there's also only one Rurik McKaiser on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram, so I'm readily available. I answer my cell phone calls as best I can. I've got two wonderful people at the office, Esther and Melvin. They manage my inbox for me, and I try to get to all of my emails within 24 to 48 hours. I try to be as accessible as possible, so please feel free to call me. Yeah.
Now, last but not least, Rurik,
Yes.
is there one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own lives?
Yes. I would say take ownership of your tomorrow. The future is already here. It is just unevenly distributed. Choose that window of the future because it's in your head. You're seeing it. You don't need anybody to buy into it. And bring that to us and choose how you want to introduce the world to your future and to make that our future. It is your gift to humanity. There is only one you. You've been created gloriously to be unique. And why not gift us with a full genius of who you are? Know that from time to time you will fall and stumble, and it's okay. We will be there to pick you up. And those of us that are hesitant to pick those others up around us, my challenge to you is look for those that have scratches on their knees, have marks on their elbows, metaphorically speaking, and help them up and help them take the next step.
Well, Rurik, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future and helping us to build a better future.
Thank you. My absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.